The rain had not stopped for 6 hours, and Maren Ellis was soaked to the bone by the time she found him. She had been driving the back roads outside her family's farm in rural Montana, checking on the fences that the storm had torn apart. The wind had been fierce that night, tearing branches from trees and turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud. Her father used to say that a Montana storm did not care who you were or what you had planned. It simply came, and you dealt with what was left after. Maren had grown up on that farm. She knew every bend in the road, every dip where water pooled after heavy rain, every tree that had a habit of dropping limbs when the wind picked up. She had taken over the land 2 years earlier, after her father passed away, and she ran it alone with the help of 2 hired hands who came in during the harvest season. It was a quiet life, sometimes a lonely one, but it was hers, and she loved it in the way people love something that has cost them real effort to keep. That night, her headlights caught something in the ditch that was not a fallen branch. At first she thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer that had been struck by a passing car. But as she slowed the truck and squinted through the rain-streaked windshield, she saw the shape of a man. She stopped the truck immediately and stepped out into the storm without a second thought. The man was lying on his side, half covered in mud, with a gash above his eye that was bleeding steadily. He wore clothing that looked military in style, though there were no name tags or insignia on it, nothing that told her who he was or where he had come from. Maren did not panic. She had spent years patching up farmhands who had cut themselves on equipment, and animals that had hurt themselves in the field. She knew how to stay calm when someone needed help. She checked his breathing, checked his pulse, and though both were weak, they were there. That was enough to tell her he was still alive, and that was all she needed to know before she acted. She could not lift him alone, not easily, but adrenaline has a way of giving people strength they did not know they had. She managed to drag him toward her truck and, with great effort, get him into the truck bed. She covered him with a tarp to protect him from the worst of the rain, and then climbed back into the driver's seat. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away, down roads that were now flooded in several places. Maren made a decision in that moment that she would later question but never truly regret. She decided his breathing was too shallow and too irregular to survive a 40-minute drive on roads that might not even be passable. Instead, she turned the truck toward her own farmhouse, just 10 minutes away. By the time she got him inside, laid him on the couch, and got a proper look at him under the light, she realized just how much trouble he was in. He had lost a fair amount of blood. His skin was pale and cold, but Maren had learned enough basic first aid over the years, patching up cuts, treating minor burns, even helping deliver a calf or two when the vet could not make it in time, to know what to do. She cleaned the wound on his head, wrapped it carefully, and got him warm and dry. She stayed by his side through the night, checking on him every 20 minutes or so, making sure his breathing did not grow worse. Around midnight, he opened his eyes. He was disoriented at first, mumbling words that did not sound like English at all. Maren gently placed a hand on his shoulder and told him he was safe, that he was in a farmhouse, and that she had found him in a ditch during the storm. Slowly, his eyes focused on her face, and the confusion cleared just a little. The first thing he said to her, once he could speak clearly, surprised her. "Don't tell anyone I was here." Maren did not ask why. She had lived alone on that land long enough to understand that some things were not hers to question. She simply nodded and told him he was welcome to rest as long as he needed. She gave him a set of dry clothes that had once belonged to her father, clothes she had kept in a closet but rarely touched. She made him a simple broth on the stove, the same recipe her mother used to make when anyone in the family got sick, and she helped him eat a little of it before he drifted back to sleep. She did not sleep much herself that night. She sat in the chair across from the couch, listening to the rain finally begin to ease outside, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall steadily, more steadily now than when she had first found him. When she woke the next morning, stiff from sleeping upright in the chair, the man was gone. At first, she wondered if she had imagined the entire night, but the bloodied bandages on the coffee table and the borrowed clothes folded neatly by the door told her it had all been real. Beside the folded clothes was a short note, written in careful handwriting. It said his name was Daniel, that he was deeply grateful for what she had done, and that he hoped she would understand why he could not explain more. He asked, again, that she keep what happened between them. Maren folded the note and placed it in a drawer in the kitchen. She went about her day as she always did, feeding the animals, checking the fences, going through the long list of chores that never seemed to shrink no matter how many she crossed off. But she found herself thinking about the stranger more than once that day, wondering who he really was, and whether he had made it to wherever he needed to go. 3 days later, a black SUV came up her driveway, kicking up dust in the late afternoon sun. Maren was in the barn when she heard the engine, and she stepped out, wiping her hands on her jeans, unsure of what to expect. Two men in dark suits got out of the vehicle. They introduced themselves politely but gave no real details about who they worked for. They told her only that they represented someone who wished to thank her for the help she had given a serviceman a few nights earlier. One of them held out a plain envelope, thick enough that Maren could guess what was inside without opening it. She looked at the envelope for a long moment before shaking her head. "I didn't do it for a reward," she said simply. "Anyone would have stopped for him. I just did what needed doing." The two men exchanged a glance, the kind of look that suggested they had not expected this answer. They pressed gently, telling her the offer came with sincere gratitude, and that she had every right to accept it. But Maren held her ground. She thanked them for coming, told them she appreciated the gesture, but repeated that she had not helped Daniel expecting anything in return. Eventually the men nodded, thanked her for her time, and got back into the SUV. Maren watched the dust settle behind them as they drove away, and she assumed that was the end of it. She went back to her chores, and the days rolled on much as they always had. She checked on the animals, mended what fences the storm had not already fixed, and slowly the memory of that stormy night began to feel like something distant, almost like a story she had heard rather than lived. 3 days after the men in suits had come and gone, Maren was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard a sound that did not belong on a quiet Montana farm. It started as a low hum in the distance, then grew louder and louder until the windows of her farmhouse began to rattle slightly in their frames. She stepped outside just in time to see a military helicopter descending into the open field beside her barn. The wind from the rotor blades flattened the tall grass in a wide circle, sending loose hay and dust swirling through the air. Maren stood on her porch, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the wind and sun, watching in disbelief as the aircraft touched down gently on the ground she had walked across 1,000 times before. The side door of the helicopter opened, and a man stepped down. He was dressed differently now, clean-shaven, in a proper uniform instead of the muddy, unmarked clothes she remembered. But there was no mistaking his face. It was Daniel, the man she had pulled from the ditch 3 nights before. He walked toward her porch with steady, purposeful steps, and when he reached the bottom of the stairs, he stopped and looked up at her with an expression that was part gratitude, part something harder to name. "You saved my life," he said, "and when my people tried to thank you properly, you turned them away. I wanted you to hear it from me directly, not from an envelope." Maren did not know what to say. She simply stood there, taking in the sight of the helicopter behind him, still spinning slowly, and the man in front of her who looked entirely different from the injured stranger she had found in the mud. Daniel explained, as much as he was able to, that he had been part of a training operation that had gone wrong during the storm. He could not share many details, only that the situation had put him in serious danger, and that if Maren had not found him when she did, things would likely have ended very differently. He told her that word of what she had done, and more importantly, word of her refusal to accept payment for it, had spread among the people he worked with. "We wanted to do something," he said, "something that actually meant something, instead of just handing you money you clearly didn't want." He told her that he and several of his teammates, people he still could not name, had come together and set up a scholarship fund in her name at the local community college. It was not something she could simply hand back, he explained, because it was not for her. It was meant for young people in the county who might never otherwise have the chance to continue their education. Maren felt her throat tighten as she listened. She had spent her whole life on that land, watching kids from town struggle to find opportunities beyond farming or ranching, watching bright students give up on college simply because the cost felt impossible. The idea that something good could come out of that stormy, chaotic night, something that would last far longer than any thank you envelope, moved her in a way she had not expected. She reached out and shook Daniel's hand, and for a moment, neither of them said anything more. The wind from the helicopter had died down enough that she could hear birds beginning to sing again in the distance, as though the world was slowly returning to normal after the strange interruption. Before he left, Daniel told her one more thing. He said that in his line of work, people rarely got the chance to properly thank the ones who helped them. Missions ended, people moved on, and gratitude often went unspoken because circumstances did not allow for anything else. But this time, he had insisted on doing things differently. He wanted her to know, clearly and directly, that what she did mattered, and that it would go on mattering to people she would likely never meet. He climbed back into the helicopter, and Maren stood on her porch, watching as it lifted off the ground, hovered for a moment above the flattened grass, and then rose higher into the sky before turning and disappearing over the hills in the direction it had come from. She never saw Daniel again after that day. She never learned exactly what unit he belonged to, or what mission had gone wrong that stormy night, or what happened to him after he flew away from her farm. Those details remained a mystery, tucked away with the note she had kept folded in her kitchen drawer. But every fall, when the scholarship recipients were announced at the community college, a new name or two would be added to the list of students supported by a fund whose origin most people did not fully understand. The paperwork simply listed it as a gift established by a group of anonymous donors, in honor of an act of kindness during a storm. Maren attended the scholarship ceremony every year, sitting quietly in the back row, watching young faces light up as they were handed the chance to build a future they might not have had otherwise. She never told anyone the full story of that night, not even the students who received the award. She simply smiled, clapped along with everyone else, and let the truth remain something private between herself, a folded note in a kitchen drawer, and a stranger she had once pulled from the mud during a storm that refused to let up. Years later, when people in town asked her about the scholarship fund and how it came to be, Maren would only say that a friend had once told her that kindness, given freely and without expectation, has a way of finding its way back around, often in ways nobody could have predicted. She never elaborated further, and most people simply assumed it was one of those small-town mysteries that everyone accepted without needing an explanation. But on quiet nights, when storms rolled through the valley and rain hammered against her farmhouse windows, Maren sometimes found herself glancing toward the road, remembering headlights cutting through the darkness, and a man lying in the mud who turned out to be far more than just a stranger in need of help. She remembered the sound of helicopter blades cutting through calm afternoon air, and the quiet, sincere words of a man who had wanted to say thank you the right way. And every time, she felt the same quiet certainty she had felt on that stormy night 3 years before, that helping someone, simply because it was the right thing to do, without asking what she might get in return, had been one of the most important decisions of her life.